You're 52 years old, married, and you're looking to retire in 10 years. You've saved $1.5 million now, but you may be asking yourself the question, is it enough? And how do I create a plan to actually be able to retire in 10 years? That's what we're going to look at in our time today. Hello, my name is John Vandergriff. I'm one of the owners and wealth planning team lead here at Blue Ridge Wealth Planners, where we help people make the transition into retirement, or even if they're 10 years out, see what things they need to do now to build a plan to be able to do the things that they're looking to do in the future. So again, if you're 10 years away from retirement or less, or maybe you're 10 years into retirement, it's really never too late to do that. I always like to tell people there's a link below this video. You can click on it anytime, schedule a time where we can talk to you about your specific situation. But we're going to look at this one today with a 52-year-old couple, $1.5 million in retirement savings. How do they need to plan to make that retirement jump in 10 years? And again, I always like to make this connection to a house in the way that you go through building a plan, just so that you can see functionally what are the steps that need to happen in creating a good plan. And so just like building a house, you know, the most important piece, although we live and occupy in the middle section here, the roof protects us from the outside forces. Really the most important part of this is the foundation here. So, and as we look at this, the foundation of a good plan is going to be the goals, objectives, and planning points that you are trying to achieve that make you different from everybody else. Because I firmly believe you do not need to have a cookie cutter solution here. This needs to be customized to you because you probably don't want a cookie cutter retirement. So as we look at this, we need to make sure that we have a good foundation, a good basis to understand what needs to happen from a planning perspective that's unique to you. Because the 5 areas that we talk about in planning are the same, but how you interact with those areas will be different. So as we look at this, we call this process a plan for everything. And as we look at that, we're covering the 5 areas that are going to affect you in your life in retirement from a financial planning perspective. So how you generate the income that you need, how you need to invest your money to maybe accomplish an income need, maybe match up with the amount of risk that you're comfortable with. Taxes, how do we help you hopefully keep as much money as possible legally through good strategic decision making here, and taking advantage of, you know, the desires that you have and seeing if there are any tax benefits. Healthcare, how do we handle those costs both today, maybe as we make a jump to retirement before Medicare, and then long-term care planning as well. And then family and legacy. So how do we handle things if one spouse passes, either prematurely or on schedule, depending on what your situation is? And then how do we make sure that we plan for that legacy that you will leave behind at some point, making sure that we get strategic work done now so that if that happens sooner than you plan on, you're able to make sure your wishes are done. So you're going to see how we progress through this conversation. But again, it's going to be built by the things that we want here and then what numbers translate into each of these 5 areas from the goals that are unique to you. And so as we do this, we're going to hit the high notes of this today. But if we go through the process and we actually construct and build this plan, you build the roof after the walls on purpose, but the roof is meant to protect the planning areas, but also the foundation piece here. And so we call the outflows, or the fruit of a good plan, the 3 C's. And the first is that we want you to have more control. And you say, how do I have more control than I have now? I'm managing things myself. I'm doing it all. Well, that is a type of control. We want you to have more control of the why am I doing things in each of these areas? How can I see the connection between these goals that I have and what needs to happen? That gives you a good level of control so that you know where to draw our income from strategically. How do we pay taxes? How do we make sure that we get our legal paperwork done? All these things need to be planned for, and if you feel like you're doing the best you can but you don't have all the answers, you need to maybe work with somebody to give you that type of control. So the next C, if we have that kind of control, hopefully it gives us confidence moving forward. Or at least if we're not where we want to be from a retirement planning perspective, confidence of what we need to do to get to where we want to be at. And then last but not least, the final three, or C, that we look at is number 3, and that is comfort. If you have the right type of control and you have confidence moving forward, that should allow you to be more comfortable and really achieve what it is that you retired to do, which is enjoy, hopefully, as much of this that you've put away, give away, however you want that to do. Again, it's going to look different for every family that we work with. So as we look at this, sometimes people get stuck at the very beginning, and the foundation piece is important, but if you don't have that today, it's something you need to work through. So as we look at this, I like to ask 3 simple questions. Obviously, we can drill down into these and the answers that you give, but as you start at this today, instead of thinking about what you're retiring from, because that can be a laundry list miles long, think about what you're retiring into. What do you want, ideally, that scenario to look like? And again, start with that, and then you can always work backwards from there. But what do you want that retirement phase of life to be? What do you want to be doing? So specifically, what are the things that you want to either continue to do or do more of? So like if you're a self-manager, do you want to do that? Or do you want to hand that off to somebody so that you can do fun things or hobbies or travel or whatnot? And then what do you want to avoid? I want to avoid another 2008 impact on my money. I want to avoid paying unnecessary taxes or being concerned about healthcare costs. Again, however you answer these questions is going to be unique to you, especially in the way that it impacts the money and the planning decisions that you need to look at making in the future here. So as we look at this, since you can't share with me as we record this video what your goals are, I'm kind of filling the gap here with some of the high note goals for this particular family. But again, it's going to be a discussion, that leads to this. This is the high level, but there's going to be questions that are asked inside of this, just so we can drill down on what actually needs to happen in each of these areas. So for this family, as we said, they're looking to retire in 10 years. They want to solve for what they would consider to be an ideal scenario. So not sacrificing things, say this is what we would like it to be. Can we make this work? As a part of that, they want to have their mortgage paid off in the next 10 years so that they don't carry that debt into their retirement. They also have one kid that recently graduated from college, one that is a sophomore, so they want to make sure they're able to get the kids completely off the payroll by the time they hit retirement so that reduces some of the expenses that they have. And then they want to be able to factor in for inflation. That's been a hot topic here. So realizing what we need today, but also projecting forward what that could look like from an expense perspective moving forward. So as we look at this, we'll start with the first area, which is income. And based on getting their mortgage paid, what they estimate the cost of kids being, which it's hard to do whenever they're eating through everything in your house. They anticipated that $120,000 a year is what they would need in today's money, gross of taxes, so $10,000 a month. And so what the first thing we have to do is factor in inflation into this figure. And again, there's a lot of different ways to do this. We can use whatever inflation rate you would like to see. I'm just showing here a simple 3% compounding over the next 10 years or 120 months. That would take $120,000 up to $161,000 and change. So just to give them a little bit more of a buffer, I'm going to put the need 10 years from now would be $162,000 a year. And so very simply, we've got to look at this and say, okay, $162,000 a year, how are we going to provide this? Well, the first thing we need to look at is what income sources we have. This family doesn't have pensions, so then they need to make a good decision with Social Security. As we've talked about before, there are many rules in the Social Security handbook, so making a quick decision off of looking at your statement or Google or what your brother-in-law did isn't necessarily the best advice. The key to Social Security is making sure that you're having a thorough discussion about the impacts of all these different things, as well as your demographic information, your age, what's your health look like, marital status will play into this because you can get some spousal benefits or survivor benefits. But again, including in this your investments is a very important thing so that your investment plan is supporting the decision that you make with Social Security, not hoping that Social Security doesn't mess up your investment plan. You want to be strategic in the way that you look at this. So as we do, just for the first conversation we have somebody, I always like to look at Social Security being filed for early, because typically from a planning perspective, if we can make the numbers work filing early, we usually can make them work if we file later. So for this particular family, first spouse would have at 62, $27,000 of Social Security. Next spouse would have $23,000. So that puts them, if they were to file for Social Security at that time, $50,000 of income that they would be generating. So simple math says you take that from 162, the need that they would have 10 years from now would be approximately $112,000. So almost what they need today. Social Security's basically just covered the inflation increase over that 10-year period of time. So what we've got to do is see, with some projections here, what this will be by percentage of not what they have today, but what they have today plus contributions and a factor for growth. So again, we're not making an investment recommendation at this point. We're just trying to have some numbers that we can work with, numbers that could be somewhat conservative. Some people would say very conservative. We'll explain how we went through this discussion, but really this is just kind of math more than anything else. So we're showing currently, with the money that they're putting in, maxing out their 401ks, and then also with their company contributions on top of it, they've got $80,000 in today's money that they're able to put into their 401k. And so if they continue that and there was a 3% increase to their salary, because we use that number for inflation, but we're also applying that to their contribution potential, that's why you see this number move from 80,000 to a little over 100. And then if we take that 80, add it to the bucket every year, and then have an average 4% growth, that may be appropriate, that may be low, depending on the aggressiveness of this portfolio. But if we just use this for planning purposes and say, if we were able to achieve a 4% growth, they would be in the ballpark of having $3.31 million by the time they hit 62. Now again, they could be higher than that, and if so, these numbers would look better. They could be lower than that, and they would look worse. So we've got to, if we work with this family, update this and make sure that we're keeping these numbers relevant. So as we said here, from an investment perspective, and I'm going to zoom in here. So we've got $1.5 million today. So in 10 years with 4% growth, they would be in a position where they've got $3.311 million. And so if we take this $112,000 as a percentage of this $3.3 million, that would be roughly 3.38%. So you say, what does that mean? Well, again, for our planning purposes, especially this far out, if we can see this number be at 4% or less, that would be something that we say, yes, I think we're on track. There could be some adjustments that need to be made over time to make sure we stay on this, but just from a high level perspective, we want to see that number be at 4% or less, because as you start to translate this to the investment category, 3.38%, if you take that, let's say it grows that every year, you take that off for income, that would imagine that this bucket would stay the same. You don't really want it to stay the same though. You may want it to go up to, again, account for inflation. So again, if you use a range here for 2 to 4%, that would mean the investment return needs to be somewhere between 5.38 and 7.38%. And so again, the higher that number gets, the more risk it requires you to take to achieve a higher level of return. So as we look at this, we could not have to go as aggressive in the future, depending on if the 4% that we used for projection purposes was low. On the other end of the spectrum, if it's not close enough, that may push them out longer than 10 years. So as we look at this, the investment risk perspective is going to be something that this family has to play out. As a 52-year-old, it may cause them to take maybe a little bit higher risk than normal because they do have a 10-year time horizon, but over that 10-year time horizon, it will probably start to shift some depending on the things that they need from their money. And as we look at that, that's something that we always want to highlight whenever we have a discussion about investments, because we need to understand what it is we want our money to do and then how to position to do that. Because as we look at it, the three things that we need from our money typically are growth, accessibility, and then protection or safety. And so as we look at that, to this point, most people that are in this family's position have been focused solely on growth, not access and protection, because they couldn't get to their 401k before 59 and a half without penalty. Didn't really care about safety on it because they couldn't touch it. So most people have that growth mindset because they have time and a willingness to take a large amount of risk. They don't need this money for an extended period. Well, most people that are on the doorstep of retirement don't have time to leave their money alone or a willingness to take a large amount of risk. So what shifts for retirees, and especially this couple, as we've talked about this, is really the need to cover inflation. So as you think about this, the closer you get to retirement, that growth bucket's job really shifts. Instead of just accumulating as much money as you can have so that you can have maybe a better income or more accessibility, more overall money to just say that you have, it really starts to become more the job of covering inflation long term so that you can continue to keep the buying power of the bucket as a whole. But as you get closer to retirement, typically you don't want the majority of your assets here. You could, depending on your goals, but you want to make sure you have the appropriate amount of money in access and protection positions for the reasons that we see below. Obviously, for emergency purposes, if you have a need that's bigger than whatever your monthly income draw is, you want to have accessibility, which typically means you're going to have investments that you can sell and get to quickly, and you also don't want to have an extreme amount of risk associated with that so that it remains accessible despite market conditions. Then we have healthcare as something that we want to highlight as well, because if we have lower risk positions that we can get to, that can help us cover things that go above our lifestyle expenses for ourselves or a spouse if an unplanned event occurs from a healthcare perspective. Now, protection becomes very important at retirement because you may want to start to, decelerate some of the risks that you've taken long term, but especially if you're like this couple and you have a percentage of income that you need, you want to make sure that you're drawing that income out from a completely safe source because you do not want to be taking a risk on your lifestyle. So again, some insurance positions could apply for this. You could put money in cash, although I don't think the long-term investment return on that will be great. But something that's safe that you can draw from is really important here, and then just knowing what options you have available in some of those investment categories. So as we look at this, depending on how that conversation would go, because again, it's not just a one-time conversation with them, that would determine really what that maximum loss looks like. The closer they get to retirement, the income is going to play a much larger factor, but at this point, we want to make sure that they're not tempted to pull away risk at the wrong time, and that's typically when the market's losing money. We want to make sure that they're invested long-term in the right buckets, and then we're basically just able to pull out of some of those growth categories the closer we get to retirement as it makes sense. So as we look at this with taxes, currently this couple is in a position where they have $200,000 a year of income. So as we look at this, their top tax rate today is at 22%. And so in the breakdown of their $1.5 million, they've got about $1,200,000 that is in pre-tax accounts, IRAs, previous 401ks, current 401ks. After-tax accounts, they have about $200,000 that's in between bank savings and brokerage investments. And then they started the Roth process a little bit ago before their income got high, and they've been able to accumulate about $100,000 in tax-free accounts. So as we look at this, this is a very common scenario, though, that we see with families where the majority of their assets are pre-tax, then they've got significantly less in after-tax or tax-free accounts. So one of the things that we like to see shift, especially with the tax environment that we're in now, is can we move these things down? If we do conversions here, it's going to put a lot of pressure on this after-tax bucket because with them being under 59 and a half, they can't access anything that's in pre-tax or even their tax-free buckets without penalty. So as we look at this, conversion would depend on how much is here. What we may look at, though, is instead of saving all this money in 401ks like they are now, trying to switch that allocation or those contributions into Roth 401ks so that they can get tax-free growth and really start to increase this bucket organically as they're saving money over time. So as we look at that, the key to that conversation is what happens with tax brackets. Because, with them being in the 22% tax bracket, if they're in a position where they are making those Roth contributions, depending on how they do that, they're probably going to make all of those within the 22% tax threshold. But again, with $80,000 or $60,000 of their money, could come close to that 12% with some of those dollars. So we've got to compare that to where tax brackets can go to. And we've seen some times that are noticeably higher than this. This is a time where 2017's brackets, as you see I marked through, because those will be the brackets that take over January 1st of 26. If there are no changes, there could definitely be changes. But as we look at it, at each of these brackets above 10%, you have a 3% increase in both of those. And they're really not far when it comes to inflation from really crossing into the 28% tax bracket with their top dollar. So as we look at this, I think they've got an opportunity between the 22 and the 25 to make those contributions at a lower tax position. The government does have the ability to obviously raise taxes higher than this, depending on what's happening. But as we look at this, that could be a good way to maximize some of those savings over the next 3 years, and then pay attention to this as we get to 2026 and beyond for the way that they're making those contributions. So we've got to pay attention to tax planning, both with the existing dollars that we have, but the future dollars that we put in, to make sure that we're making the best overall decision for you as an individual. Because again, tax planning is going to have a major impact, not just on what you have today, how it affects you from an income perspective. Again, it should have a say-so in how you invest to try to maximize some of the tax potential. So tax planning becomes very important in the grand scheme of things and really connects into a lot of different areas. So we see a direct connection here as we transition from taxes to healthcare. This family does not have long-term care insurance currently, so we've got to examine what's the amount of liquid after-tax savings that they have right now. And so I'm going to break this down two different ways, because the amount of liquid after-tax money that they have today is $200,000 based on this. Technically, they have $300,000 of after-tax dollars, but until 59.5, this entire 100 is not available to them. Contributions would be, but the growth on that money is stuck until 59.5. So as we look at this, we want to make sure we are able to increase these buckets, not just so that we have less in IRAs and more over here, but so that long-term we can have more liquid after-tax money that's there for emergencies or covering healthcare costs that hopefully is going above and beyond maybe what we're using to position for them in the event of lifestyle needs like they're going to have 10 years from now. This would be money that's separate and available, and hopefully is little tax ramifications from those dollars as possible as they move forward. So as we look at this, beneficiaries, so they have each other listed, 100%. Then they have 3 kids. The one that split a third each. As we look at this, beneficiaries are not up to date because all of the 401ks and IRAs were set up with just each other. They don't have any listing for the kids. You could take care of that through what's called a per stirpes designation, which would basically just pass this money to the next blood relative living, which in this case would go to the kids. But any investment accounts you have, you want to make sure you list the people there. And then if it is kids that are maybe below an age that you want, having either those assets go into a trust, which could be a part of the estate planning document so that there is some control on it, or hopefully they age to a point where you can trust them with the money without a trust, then they can make some different decisions that are unique to them. So as we look at estate planning documents, they do have wills that they did early on, so some of those will need updating. At the time that they did them, they had living wills but did not have powers of attorney. So again, one of the steps that we encourage people to take is to establish power of attorney for both assets and health care, so that you can have somebody who makes decisions for you in each of those areas while you're still living but not capable of those decisions for yourself. And then, as we look at this, do they need a trust? As we dig into their situation, it really will depend on how things develop with their children, their spending habits, to determine if there is some extra controls needed on this whenever this estate gets to a point where both of the spouses are gone and as you know, if you have kids, they're not going to handle money the same way. So as we look at this annual gift amount for charity, this family did not have that as a priority. It's a good to ask this question, not just for legacy purposes, but also for tax planning, so that, if we are in a position where we do have a high income, if we can do some things strategically from charitable planning to try to reduce the impact of this taxable income, that could help both from a contribution and conversion perspective in the future to try to show, less income and get more credit, hopefully, for some of those charitable gifting ideas that you have. So as we look at this, we've gone through in a fairly quick fashion. Typically it takes a little bit longer than this, because if we're talking to you about this, obviously we're going to answer any questions that you have as you go through this. But we've covered the 5 areas, and we've been able to glean functionally what are some things that, as we start off at a high level with the objectives, goals, concerns, what needs to happen in these areas, and getting buy-in from you on if these are the right numbers, because again, we're working with you on this, to then go to the next step and say, are we doing this? Because a lot of times when people come to us, they may have the right building materials, to use our house metaphor before, they just don't have any structure or frame of reference of how to put these things together in a way that can be beneficial to them and their families moving forward. And so as we look at that, we always want to test and see, do we have the right stuff? Are we in the right investments? Are we able to generate the income need that we have, based on where the things are today? Are we investing into the right buckets with our contributions moving forward? How are we paying attention to taxes and healthcare decisions that could creep up on us? And then family legacy decisions, we want to make those now. And if we're not in a position where we've done that, we want to start to have discussions that say, these are the things that need to happen. And then, it's a testing first and then a recommendations. Anytime you're working with a fiduciary, that should be the way that things happen. They test what you're doing first, then they make recommendations to you based on those testings to see what things need to change, what things need to stay the same. And then at the end of that, if there are changes that need to happen and it makes sense for us to implement some of those with you, we're going to tell you what that would look like working with us individually, costs associated, anything of that nature, answer any questions you have. Because again, what we're looking for in this, obviously all 5 of these things are important, but we want to be able to partner along with a family and help them solve for really these decisions, help them with the investment management, help them once they get to 10 years from now, drawing out from the right buckets, paying taxes on this money as efficiently as possible, where to go to for healthcare emergencies, how to structure an estate plan, working with other professionals. That's the role that we play in being somebody that helps strategize these different areas. So if you don't feel like you have that today, that's okay. You just need to work toward that if you feel like you're not able to have the control, confidence, and comfort like we talked about earlier. So you see a link below. I would encourage you to click that link. If you'd like to have a discussion with us here at Blue Ridge Wealth Planners, you can get on our calendar, see if the way we do things could be a benefit to you. We're not a match for everybody, but we do know that this planning style is a match for a lot of people here locally. We've been able to get a lot of traction here with people around the country who just like the way we talk about things. Because as you go through this process, I would encourage you to find somebody, not just the first one that you see, but somebody who speaks a language that you like, that you would like to work with, and makes a lot of sense to you. So hopefully that's what happened today. If you do have questions or comments, feel free to leave those on this video. We'd be happy to answer or clarify anything today. But as far as the content goes, that's all we have for now. We look forward to sharing more content with you in the future. And thanks for joining us today.